Hey, how's it going? I'm Laila Noor, and I'm taking you on a journey across our nation and around the world. You'll hear my conversations with people doing fascinating work and living life in extraordinary ways. You'll listen to me and my guests tackle taboo topics that might make you squirm. You'll learn about forgotten stories that never or rarely get covered in mainstream media. You'll also just hear me talking and having fun with people who I love. This is Unheard Voices. Are you ready? Let's go! In light of the Black Lives Matter movement and protests, many people are examining how racism plays out in their daily lives. One aspect that rarely gets spoken about publicly is race in romance, and how biases affect dating and romantic pursuits. My guests and I came together to discuss this topic and our experience with it in the US. We shared our personal thoughts and stories. By no means does this discussion encompass everyone's experience, but it is a meaningful snapshot. There are a handful of resources that we reviewed before going on air. If you're interested in accessing these links, check out the episode description. Hello and welcome. This is your host, Laila Noor. On this episode, we are discussing personal experiences and thoughts surrounding racial preferences and biases when dating and choosing romantic partners. I'm joined today by three guests who will be providing their insights, Myriam, Chris, and Danicia. Welcome and thank you for graciously volunteering to come on air and discuss this topic, one that many folks are not comfortable with discussing so openly. Let's get started by introducing ourselves and providing some background information for context. I'll go first. My name is Laila, and I'm a 31-year-old heterosexual female. I'm an American born and raised of Pakistani descent. Both of my parents immigrated to the US from Pakistan in the early 1980s. I've been living in the San Francisco Bay Area for the past 7 years, but I grew up all across the US and spent some time abroad in the Middle East as well.
My name is Myriam. I am 32. I identify as a female, cisgendered. I am straight. I was born in Haiti and raised in Indiana. I am a naturalized citizen. Currently, I live in Los Angeles, California, and I was raised primarily in the Midwest in Indiana, and this is where I live now.
My name is Chris. I'm a 31-year-old white cis gay man. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was raised here and I live here now and work and play and study. Yeah, thanks for having me.
My name is Danicia Monet. I'm a 35-year-old cisgendered woman. Live in Indianapolis, raised in the South, and come from a large Gullah and Caribbean family.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining me today. And let's dive right into this discussion. The first question that I prepared, and I'd like to start off with, is when was the first time you perhaps realized that your race and the race of others influenced your own romantic choices, or how others perceived you as a romantic interest? And is there perhaps a particular memory or story you have that you would like to share? Well, I can start off with a little story that I have from my childhood. This was probably like the very beginning of when I started to realize, okay, how I appear influences romantic pairings. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, we as a class went to a camp. It was a camp in Indiana. We all stayed in log cabins, and one night, all the kids were having fun, and it's just everyone's talking about like, oh, who should date who, you know, like this elementary school way that kids try to pair up people or talk about crushes and things like that. And I'm brown of South Asian heritage, and I remember, and at this time, the class I was in, it was probably like 99% white, and that was the case of where I was living in at the time. I was paired up with the only other brown kid in the class, and I remember thinking, that's interesting that they paired the two of us together, even though we hadn't even interacted before or anything. So that was just my first realization that there was some influence on how you appear for romantic pairings.
I think as a white person in middle America, it's not something that is at the forefront of one's mind, like, because we're not exposed to it. It's not something that I have to think about. But I would say my first exposure to fetishization was probably in college, because my boyfriend at the time, his mother, and it was in a joking manner, it was in jest, but it caused me to fall into myself. He was Black, and she made a joke about me fetishizing him. So I think that was sort of like a very shocking moment for me, and it caused me to have to think about some things. And that was probably 2010. I was 21, so 10 years ago. Yeah. But before that, it was, me just coasting along, living my life, not being exposed, having the privilege of not having to think about it, for sure.
I come from a pretty large, multi-ethnic, varied skin tone family. But, in my immediate growing up, I only saw Black and Black relationships. It wasn't until I went probably to high school that I even developed my first crush, and that was on a Filipino boy. But I also was I'm a very tall and very dark-skinned Black woman growing up here in Middle America, and it's just now, late or mid 2000s where not even mid 2000s, early 2000s, where dark-skinned women are being seen as beautiful from the eyes of others. And so yeah, I think it's always been kind of a thing for me, because I'm actually the darkest in my family. So it's always been kind of a thing in the back of my mind, both seeing only Black and Black relationships, or Black and someone else of a mixed ethnicity, whether it's Black and Latino or Black Asian. But yeah, leaving the confines of my home and starting to explore that world more is when I really started to understand that the way that I look, my appearance, has everything to do with whether or not someone is attracted to me as a person, first and foremost.
Yeah, for me, I think that I grew up in Haiti, and then I moved to the United States, to Indiana, when I was 11, but I was always aware of colorism, because in Haiti, more lighter skinned people were seen as desirable, and I had all skin tones in my family. But specifically in middle school, when I moved to Indiana, I think in Haiti, I remember my first crush was a Black boy, And then in Indiana, my first crush was like a white boy in middle school. But I was always aware that like he might not like me because I'm Black or I'm dark. So that was kind of like my first experience with like internalized racism, like as far as like interracial dating, as far as like how desirable I'm going to be to my romantic interest due to my dark skin. And I always, I was growing up also in an environment where I was told I was pretty for a Black girl. So that kind of was another experience I've had with like interracial relationships too. But I think like my real awareness of like fetishization um, was probably like college for me, because I kind of felt like I was, but I didn't have a word for it until I was like doing more research and learning more about it. But it was always something that I was aware of even before I knew there was a word for it. So that's always been that was like my very first experience with interracial dating.
Myriam, you touched upon a point. You were saying, I'm not sure if those guys would find me attractive. That was something similar I experienced when I was growing up in Indiana. I spent my elementary and middle school years there, and the city I was in, the schools that I went to were predominantly white. There were only a handful of colored students. And I remember that was always something that I kind of noticed and thought about was, well, seeing who the guys prefer. It looks like they prefer mostly white girls. Like, am I not attractive to them, or things like this? And, as an adolescent and when you're a kid, you're growing up, you're developing. And then if you are the minority in a particular place, then you're thinking of those things as well. It's a lot of things to handle and grow up with at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think at that age we all struggle with like our desirability, because
Exactly.
we're such a like look-centric culture.
Mm-hmm.
But the added layer of race kind of puts a whole new different like experience and spin on it, and it kind of adds, it makes it a lot, trying to figure out your identity and your desirability, and with the race mixed into it, kind of like puts a whole new different kind of experience to it, for sure.
Definitely. And for me, my experience that I had was, once my family, we moved to Rhode Island, and that's where I finished my high school. And then I came to California and did my college in Southern California. And I've spent basically my adult years between Southern California and the Bay Area. And just what I experienced was, once I moved to California, which, is quite a much more diverse place compared to Indiana. I was in a suburb of Indianapolis. It was such a shift in what I experienced in terms of how I perceived my desirability, what my experiences were. It's also, you're getting older, you're becoming more confident in yourself as well. But definitely, I think going to a school that was super diverse, and then having that experience where I was seen by certain peers as, okay, I am desirable, and I don't have to have like certain features to be perceived as desirable, that definitely changed the confidence I had in myself and how I perceived things, and it just kind of opened my world. I don't know if any of you guys had a similar experience, going to college or changing the location that you guys were in terms of moving around.
It's interesting to hear Laila and Myriam's stories from being younger, because I think I knew on some level my whole entire life that I was gay, and so I sort of like repressed that until college, and so dating was never like, it wasn't on the table, it wasn't part of the equation, it was just school, like that was it. So I feel like I could have learned a lot more if I had been quote unquote liberated when I was younger, and I didn't have to start learning all these dynamics, as a young adult.
I'm a late bloomer to this game of romance or intimacy, etc. So I think having my first crush in high school, I didn't even have my first kiss until I was like 22 years old. So I'm a very late bloomer. But with my first crush being, like I said, on a Filipino boy, I don't think that my sexual orientation or like my sexual preference has changed. I think I've always been this way, in that I'm what's called like a demisexual or demi-romantic. And I think it was that then. I just didn't have like language for it until now. I'm still very much the same way.
Can you explain for folks who don't know what that term means?
Demisexual?
Yes.
Yeah. So demisexual, demi-romantic. It's like a sexual orientation that's really attracted to a person based on circumstance. After you've like built a relationship with them and have an emotional connection to them. I can say that I lean more towards that than anything else. So very much like demisexual, demi-romantic, sapiosexual, very attracted to knowledge and conversation, more than anything else. That's like the driver for me. So it takes me time. I see beautiful people all day, but I'm not like attracted to them until I get to know them. I'm 35 and I still feel like a young adult. I still feel like I'm 12 or 17, kind of navigating these waters of relationship and intimacy, friendship, familialship, all of these things, kinship. So I still feel young in the game, but I think my ideology has deepened in that I understand the investment of time that it takes to build strong relationships no matter what. I don't think I had that as like a young person, you know.
I feel like in the gay community, if I can speak on behalf of an entire group. So I went on to Grindr before this to like take screenshots of people's bios that I thought were interesting. And you know, I'm just like, I'm gonna get some winners. And I did. I noticed a lot of it was more about masculine expression. There was definitely race relations, and I think those two things are definitely connected. So it's interesting to see men who operate in the realm of sex. That seems to be a huge motivating factor for a lot of men. And then gay men specifically, so the men have each other. It can just be, they try and be very efficient about what it is that they want. And so it can be kind of cruel and disheartening sometimes at how just, it just seems like a little bit inhumane and unjust. So yeah, I know I'm covering a lot, but when you guys are talking about your childhood experiences in dating, it was just like it raised a lot of those thoughts and feelings for me.
Yeah, for sure. And since you mentioned Grindr, we can go on to the questions around dating apps. And for those of you who have used the dating apps, like, what have your experiences been on them? And what are your thoughts on the apps that have the race filters, or people who are very explicit about their race preferences in their profiles?
That seems very bizarre to me in some ways. And also, I mean, it feels bizarre to me because I understand how bias exists in algorithms. And I think those things are used to create data in other ways that gets disaggregated very dangerously and irresponsibly. So that's how it feels really, really awful and disgusting to me. But I'm also someone who believes in like pro-choice and self-separation as a counter to forced integration. this would have been like a huge problem if I'd grown up in like the 60s, probably having this conversation. But I believe that people should be validated in their choices, but I don't think that their choices should be based on a bias of creating a value system of worth, if that makes sense. Like, just because I'm a Black person does not mean that I'm less than you because you're a white person. However, if you simply enjoy dating someone from a particular race because you have more commonality with that experience, with that lived experience, then that's their right to do. But to discriminate and carry a prejudice against me simply because of my skin color, that feels and sounds, and I would hate to be a part of a dating platform that had that as an option.
I have a love-hate relationship with dating apps because I feel like I relate to Chris's story about being like kind of like repressing your sexuality, because I've been through sexual trauma. So like for the longest time I was very out of touch with like my sexuality and dating, and it wasn't really until like my mid-20s to now that I've started to really date. So I kind of did shut myself off, like like in my teenage. I mean, I had boyfriends, but I don't even count them because I was so like not like present. But I have been on dating apps for the past 5 years, and I haven't been on the ones that have preferences, but I've heard of them, and I know a lot about dating statistics, especially me being a Black woman, and I know all about like all that stuff because I need to know what I'm getting into. But I've had, I've been on, Tinder and Bumble and Hinge, and there's even more like, there's hookup ones, there's dating ones. I've been in all of them. But I have a lot of experience, so I'm trying to say. Me too.
I learned a lot from the links that I learned new things, and it also reaffirmed some points from the links and articles that you sent. I think it's great. Technology has been great for the gay community because people can do things in a safer way rather than cruising, like in public places for sex and romantic relationships. But I'm not sure if the benefit of that is outweighing the cost right now. Because there's a lot of racism as well as internalized racism going on. Delete the account, something. Because I couldn't imagine being a young gay Black man or Asian man or South Asian man, et cetera, and then seeing no fats, no femmes, no Asians, things like that. And like maybe the unrealized trauma that might be going on inside of them, and then only realizing later when it surfaces, like the detriment to their like health and well-being it's taking. So it's awkward because I'm like, you shouldn't have those to begin with, but if you are, don't make it known, don't make it public, just operate quietly in silence and go about your business. It also brings up another point about, I think it touches on internalized racism. No, that doesn't. I'm not going there. It's more about, I don't have a problem with racial minorities dating within their own group. Because I think to me, it seems safe. I have a problem when white people have certain racial preferences or reject certain races when it comes to intimacy, dating. I haven't totally gone deep down that thought. So yeah, it seems, I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion, because I'm sure a lot of people are just like, oh, you should let everyone. But, you know, if people who are undergoing who are going under oppression and violence, like, I personally don't see a problem with, I'm not personally offended when I see a Black person on Grindr or Tinder who only want to date Black people. I think that that's great. So, and then you get the reverse. There are sometimes people who are like, whites only, just my preference. And it's I have so many screenshots of that from today. It's kind of unreal. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and to your point about for the racial minorities having that preference of dating their same race and that being a safe space for them, I did download Hinge about 2 months ago, and I tried it out for a little bit, and they have a racial preference in the app, and it was interesting in all the events that happened these past few months. They had a statement within the app about why they had the racial preferences, and their statement was around this idea of it's, you know, for other Black people, for Blacks to date each other, it's a safe space for them, or perhaps for South Asians, they're looking for someone with the same cultural heritage. So these are the reasons why we have this filter. And I definitely understand that too, with how, you know, society is structured and racism, right? There's these power levels and things. But I also think for for Hinge to make that statement, it's kind of like they're not acknowledging the two sides to that of having the filter by just saying that. I don't know, it's a double-edged sword. Those are my thoughts around it.
So they didn't address all they were looking at was like the positive benefits of the filter, and they weren't like, oh, there could be these problems happening that you should be aware of.
So they acknowledge the positive reasons why, or the safety reasons why for ethnic or racial minorities. But I think, to be completely honest, they should also acknowledge how it could be misused when they're putting out that statement. But obviously it's for their marketing benefit to only write it one way.
Yeah, I think that Hint is the only dating app that I ended up sticking with because I just didn't like any of the other ones. And I mean, what Chris was saying about how he feels comfortable, he sees why, you know, non-white people would want to stay within their in-group. But it's more problematic when white people are more exclusionary. But even within our own, you know, even within the Black community, we have preferences within our own interracial dating dynamics too, or in-group race dating dynamics too, that prefer certain features or certain skin tones or, you know, whatever. And I do feel at the end of the day, like, I think I preferences are problematic, but they are real. People have, you know, I don't like bananas, I like apples, you know, like those are real. But I think people need to really dig deep inside and ask, okay, so why do I like bananas? Like, or like, why is this my preference? As opposed to like, what do I like about a person, you know? And so I feel like at the end of the day, like, if you can address that, then you can deal with your preferences that way much better than just like, I prefer, you know, this person as opposed to that person for so and so reason, you know.
Right.
And I totally forgot Hinge even had a ethnicity section. I literally had to go on there and realize, oh my God, what is mine set as? And it was like set for all, which makes sense because I'm like, okay. But yeah, I didn't realize.
Are we gonna be making some changes after today? Okay.
I'm perfectly. I mean, I've dated everybody from every background. Yeah. So for me, it's more like the person, not necessarily the race. But I am deep down, I know inside that I would prefer to be with a Black person, just because when I've dated Black people, my life has been slightly easier as far as like racism concerns. but obviously I'm still single and I haven't met anybody for other reasons. But yeah, but I don't think my it's a preference. I mean, maybe it is a preference. I guess maybe that's the right, I don't know if it's the right word I would use, but I'm open to all races. But deep down, I'm like, my life would just be simpler if I was with a Black person.
And especially if, you have this similar ancestry from the same country or things like that, there's a shared culture that your parents come from, things like that. I definitely understand that, being the child of immigrants. And for me personally, I have been open, like I've dated across the spectrum. There was definitely a period where I definitely like purposely avoided dating other South Asian men because I felt like, and I mean, I've changed that now, but back then I felt like I don't want to be pigeonholed into like only having to date these people or being expected to only end up with a South Asian man from the same country that my parents are from. But I have dated Pakistani American men now, and for me, like what Myriam, what you're saying, it comes down to the person and who they are. Like, do you have common interests or things that you like to do together and things like that? And yeah, I think people need to be honest with themselves and understand that when they are only dating particular people, like, do they recognize that society has influenced their choices and how they perceive others in the world? If they recognize that, then that's good. Because I'm not gonna try to police everyone. Everyone needs to date this person and that, but people need to be aware and mindful, I think, and be honest with themselves intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't want to do the work. They're just not aware. And to your point, Myriam, in regards to being a little more relaxed around Black men, my first boyfriend, the one I mentioned 10 years ago, I thought, I was a little social justice advocate kid student in college. I studied African politics. I was like, I'm so aware, I'm so knowledgeable. Listen, I wore him out. He was tired, but he would tell me things and I would be skeptical. I'm like, are you sure? That doesn't sound right. And I can't even think of like an example. Stuff about me and also society and his lived experience. And I'm like, no way. And I think that created a lot of resentment. I finally would come to over time. I'm not sure if I ever acknowledged that to him. But there's a quote that comes to mind that's like, behind every male feminist or something to that extent is a very tired woman. And I'm like, I'm sure the same could be applied to racial minorities who date white people, like who just don't have to experience or think about it. And when they try and bring it up, they're met with a little bit of resistance. Not me, I'm not the one. I'm a unicorn or whatever. So I've actually this conversation is so vulnerable. Okay, I've actually had thoughts of like, I know. I've actually had thoughts of like, should I, if I'm really down for the cause, should I only be dating white people? Like, to not cause any harm to anybody? Which is so weird, because it's like what supremacists of any variety would want. And so which leads into a discussion of like diversity inclusion and like how that's not the answer. It goes, my mind immediately, I start disassociating and my mind goes like awry. But I've definitely had those thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why you would come to that conclusion, because as a Black person, I've kind of avoided dating a lot of white men after a while because I get exhausted from trying to
I'm
either
yeah.
like explain my humanity or like black slang racism to them, and it's like at this point in my life you either know, you don't, I can't teach you anything. So I can see that, but at the end of the day I'm not gonna like close myself off from people, but I do I don't think that just us dating within our own, like I don't think you just choosing to date only white people is gonna be a good like solution to what you're gonna deal with. I feel like you're just gonna avoid having certain discussions because it
Right.
makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's
But
escapism.
Yeah.
yeah, but as a black person, I can see, to me it's not even just about your partner too. At some point it's like, okay, now you're gonna like, what are his friends like, what are his family like, who you're gonna marry into. And it's not even just like the person you're gonna be with, it's also the everything else that comes along with it, that kind of,
The baggage.
yeah, that is kind of exhausting. But if
I
you
think
if you find a partner that's down for, I don't know. I've just never met a white person that was willing to like disown their family, or, like they always made excuses, or like, even friends that I haven't dated, it's like, oh, I, my family's member voted for Trump, F them, but here you are at the Thanksgiving table, like acting like everything's okay. Like, what are the sacrifices you're gonna make to, actually like, address some of the things that you're concerned about? So it's like, if I don't know if like my white partner would, if I was with them, they would be willing to actually do the work for
yeah.
like anti-racism, like change that needs to happen. So
Yeah, you made a really good point. Through the discomfort, there can be so much growth and learning. And as long as every party is going about in a way that's healthy and supportive and nurturing, it can do a lot of good. So that's really nice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, I think it's important for everyone to keep on challenging themselves, even if they're going to be in situations where they're uncomfortable, but you always grow from those situations and opportunities, and always just follow your heart and where the love is. So don't ever, I don't think, close yourself off. And
It's just a thought.
yeah,
I have
yeah.
not acted on it. I'm just like, what's the best thing I can do right now? And yeah, I
yeah,
feel like our generation is very morbid and dark sometimes, even in our humor. So we always go straight to like the dark place. But what were you gonna say, Myriam?
I mean, I do get it, because like I I think like I understand coming to a conclusion that, okay, maybe I should just date white people for a white person. Because I've come to the conclusion maybe I should just be with like, I'm at this phase where I think somebody that is not from American culture, or some kind of immigrant or second generation, is more for me, or first generation. And it doesn't even really have to do with race at this point. It's more like culture and class. Because currently I'm seeing somebody who's Indian American, but they're raised in the Midwest, and they're so brown, but they're still like, you know, so I think,
Culturally middle American.
yeah, but then like still like kind of like me, like outside looking in,
Right, they
Yeah.
understand the immigrant experience.
Yeah. So, I think that it's like anything in life, you're just trying to like narrow it down, what you like, what you don't like, but still keeping aware of like, okay, but why is it that I want a certain class of person, as opposed to just, dating a lower class, quote unquote, low class perceived person. So it's a very like exhausting mental thing you have to constantly exercise, but
Yeah.
being aware is very important.
I've found that recently too, like in my dating experiences, probably like since the past 7 years since I've been in the San Francisco Bay Area, I do tend to gravitate towards people who have like a similar background in terms of being children of immigrants or a near generation of recent immigrants, because there's a lot of shared experiences and understanding with that helps connect people. So I've noticed that definitely in who I've dated recently. And then, yeah, like these factors that you mentioned, like class always comes in, like education, and then family approval, like how much does your family have a say in who your partner is and things like this. What do you envision your future family to look like? So there are a lot of pressures on a person when they're choosing. Unless if they decide like I'm going to totally live my life independently from all of this. So, which usually is not the case. We have kind of touched upon this, but have you noticed the social structure influencing romantic choices of friends and family? And what have you noticed observing of others in your surrounding?
Well, I think growing up in like my first 11 years of my life was like mostly Black country. And then coming of age, like in my teens and mid 20s in a predominantly white space has definitely like influenced my dating life, because I've always felt like I had a strong sense of Black identity, even when I struggled with my own identity as far as who I was and where I belonged. But then I did grow up like, my crushes were white people. And I got exposure to a lot of media. I watched a lot of books, or I watched a lot of movies, listened to a lot of music that were predominantly quote unquote white. So like I always like had crushes on like white people and like white men, and then like when I saw minorities that I was attracted to, it was just like, oh my god, like a Black person, and I was attracted to them too. So I think that media does have a strong influence on all of us, even if you in ways you don't even know. And so like that social structure has had influence on me. And then also like being in predominantly white spaces and not having other Black people or brown people around, it's like who you have right there is who you can like. And so that also has influence on you too.
Mm-hmm.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Place me anywhere and I will find a lover. Rest assured.
Yeah.
I, carrying over from the last conversation to this one, I couldn't stop thinking about my sisters. I have 2 sisters and 2 brothers, but my sisters are in mixed families. One of my sisters, her husband is Dominican, Afro-Latino. I don't know if he would subscribe to that. He doesn't consider himself part of the diaspora or Black. I do. I don't know. I feel like I feel like as he walks through life, I feel like if that's how I perceive him, then I'm sure other people would perceive him similarly. But, and I feel like that speaks to like a white patriarchal hegemonic imperialist history there, and how that has pervaded certain colonized countries. And that idea has, pick a country and we can find an example like Rwanda, Hutu versus Tutsis, and how the Belgians decided who was going to be who, and how to this day that's affecting policy decisions, etc. So I could definitely see it in him. And it's so funny because my niece has very curly brown hair and is darker skinned, but my nephew, her older brother, has my skin complexion, but with very bright curly red hair. And And I'm like, we haven't had that discussion as to like why his side of the family has carried that recessive gene with them. My grandpa had red hair, so we know where it's come from my family, but what's the tea? What's going on there? So that'll be fun to talk about Thanksgiving if people are willing and ready. And then my other sister, her ex-husband is Mexican, and her children came out with dark hair and darker features, even though they're only quarter Mexican. So it's funny to see, it's not funny, it's interesting to see that that sister's family navigate situations like with school and with each other. That particular ex-brother-in-law has a lot of unresolved internal issues. He's constantly quoting Ben Shapiro to me, and he loves Candace Owens, and he's making my nieces wear like MAGA shirts.
Oh my.
It's deep. And my sister has asked me how to approach conversations like that, and I've tried to help the best I can, but I'm like, at the end of the day, like, you have to protect yourself and your spirit, because he is very, he likes to have arguments. He doesn't want to have discussions. He wants to have arguments. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think it ties into like, machismo and patriarchal standards that a lot of cis straight men are carrying with them. And, I would just want to protect the children. So I'm just, effeminate, fun, gay uncle that's trying to like broaden their horizons. I just, he can do his thing and I'll do my thing. And at the end of the day, they can make their own choices.
One thing I've noticed, being a South Asian woman, I have noticed amongst some brown men within the Pakistani American community, other like Indian American or Middle Eastern communities, there are some brown men who specifically state a preference of only wanting to be with white women. And I've experienced this with some family members or seen it played out. And I think that's interesting to see, because I think there's an element in there of wanting to somehow elevate their status in the American society by marrying a certain color that's considered right at the top of this hierarchy. So that was something I was aware of. I think I first started to become aware of it probably in middle or high school, when I'd start to notice their preferences and you see what the dating patterns are or who they end up with. So that's always something that I think it's some obvious internalized racism. It's an obvious, they're trying to raise themselves, quote unquote, in the eyes of American society by only dating those particular people. Something that always very much bothered me. And yeah, I always think if your children are going to, the children that are born, if they're looking like they are brown, how are you going to pass on to them respect and love for themselves and appreciation of their culture? Or are you going to just ignore that completely?
Yeah, I saw that too growing up in Haiti, because before I experienced racism in America, I experienced colorism there. And growing up, even unconsciously, everybody wanted to marry rich Black men in society always had lighter skinned wives. I mean, Haitian men are notorious for having multiple families, so they would have their main wife would be a light skinned upper class woman, and they would have side kids with darker skinned women and all that stuff. But my family, the men all married just brown Black women, but it's we're kind of not the norm. I think most my dad came from a privileged background for Haitians, where his family had money and they had education, and so he married a dark-skinned woman, and so he had dark-skinned children. But in in um in Haiti, it's like anything light is aspired to, white is aspired to.
Mm-hmm.
And then in America, it's the same way, where it's like, we live in a white supremacist society, so white is always at the top. So even if it's almost like you have to like make an active choice to be like, I don't want to aspire to that, and whatever that means. But I think at the end of the day, I think everybody and for whatever reason, whether it's like you want to elevate yourself, or
Mm-hmm.
I've met like really like pro black, dark black men, and then they'll say things like, I want light skinned beautiful babies, and it's like, how do you like what kind of cognitive dissonance are you going through your mind, where you're pro black but then want light skinned children?
Yeah.
So I see it all the time in culture, and like our, Instagram, with like mixed race, racially ambiguous women are always like, the new beauty standards. And
Yeah.
it's like everywhere in our society, we're told white is better, light skin is better than black skin. I mean, you see it like recently in the news, they had all these like skin lightening companies in India. They were going to change their name to like from Fair and Lovely to something else, but at the end of the day, the product still exists, and it's there for that reason it was called that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like everywhere in our society, we're told every day in every facet that like white is better, and it's almost like a political statement when you decide that, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, very much so, I'll honestly say I have been a victim of both the mindset of having that and the mindset of it being expressed upon me. It runs deep. It runs really deep. When you grow up in these types of like colonized, civilized, uh, white framed spaces, all of these things have been kind of forced into our neighborhoods, those of us who are like people of culture, people of color, as opportunities for us to devalue one another. So yeah, it has played a big role in my life in the past, and I work actively daily to unlearn that behavior.
I think a lot of people's implicit biases is showing. And by that, I mean, I think it couldn't be me. I'm not like that. Without realizing that it's happening. And like, it's been happening for, 400 years or more. Like, all of that has been carried with us to this day. And I think, Myriam, you made a good point about how a lot of it's being called out in well, I want to say the very recent past, but a part of me feels like it's been trying to be called out for quite some time, and people are listening at the moment, in this moment we're in. So hopefully, if they're rejecting it on the surface, my only hope is that it's planting a seed in people's minds, and they can start to make more conscientious decisions versus subconscious ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can always see like those kinds of things balancing out, because you always see like mixed race or biracial people very being adamant on being with dark people, or like wanting to and identifying with their blackness and calling themselves black. And so I think sometimes like within our own society it kind of evens out, but at the end of the day, the big umbrella is like white supremacy, and it's like always there. But I think a lot of the other reasons why me personally I always wanted to be with a black man is because I want children that look like me, and I want dark brown babies. I don't want mixed race children. Not that there's anything wrong with mixed race children, and if I had them, I would love them and treat them, because society is gonna treat you brown no matter what shade you are. It's just like some shades are more privileged than others. So it's like when black men say, "Oh, I want mixed race babies," it's like, well, they're still gonna be treated like, you know, like they're brown and their mothers are dark skinned. So it's like, it's almost like you're doing your own children a disservice. So
Do you think a part of it is for like the dad in that instance is like they don't want to do the work of having dark black skinned children because they know what it's like, or is it a lot of things?
it's a lot of things. I think it's like, I mean, there is an element where a parent wants a better life for their children, but I think part of it is also just like a status too, like, oh, I have a mixed race baby and I have like beautiful, like, and I mean, there's a lot of like, misogyny going on too with it. It's just so many things.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. I think there's the status element, definitely, with folks coming from nations that were colonized. There's that whole element too that plays into it. Yeah, I feel like it just always comes down to people think that certain things are going to elevate them, right, and increase their power and increase their family's power, like the generations to come.
yeah, I mean, it's true because the power thing, because there's so many studies out there that says, the lighter you are or you're perceived to be, gonna make more money, you're gonna have a better education, you're gonna live in a better zip code, like all that stuff does, play into each other for sure. And I don't really blame anyone for trying to have a better, trying to elevate themselves. But it's like there's other ways to elevate yourself outside of like race, like you could,
Right.
there's education, there's, you can elevate your mind too, it's like, but you can't really buy a house with your mind, I guess. But yeah.
People are just thinking about the now instead of like the community as a whole. Like, how will this benefit me?
Yeah.
Not like my children.
I mean, our society is very much, the word's slipping from my mind, but they want individualistic and then want things right away. So what's the easiest way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, instant gratification.
Yeah, instant gratification. There we go. Thanks, Myriam.
But I, like when I was growing up, my dad insisted I had black dolls and books with black kids in them. Like he sent me, like a giant black doll on one of my birthdays when I was younger in Haiti. So it's just like, I think no matter what race your children is, you have to actively teach them if they're black, self-love, and if they're white, just how racist the society is,
Yeah. And I think sometimes though, like what I've seen, no matter what the parent teaches at home, ultimately there's also going to be the influence of peers from the school and the friend group of the kid. And that can sometimes have a much greater influence than the parents, no matter what they teach at home or what views they try to impart on their children. I've seen many examples of that where the parents taught self-love or respect for the culture, but because what the peers thought of them was so much more important, right, than their family, that influenced them in the end.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that play out in one of my sister's kids. They're literally radicalizing their grandma, like my mother. My mom is awkward. She's a boomer, and like the critical thinking skills don't really appear to be there. I mean, she didn't have a liberal arts education, so I think that helps for me, because because the rest of my family they don't have college degrees, so like it seems like they don't think about it. And I don't know if it's because I went to university or what, but yeah, my niece and nephew, they will literally educate my mother. Like my sister and brother-in-law's children are doing the work for them. And I'm just like, they're doing the work for me too. I'm just like, and they're like 13 and 10.
I love
so.
I have a lot of hope for the Zillennial generation.
Yeah.
They're really coming through for us, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to move on to the next question, which I think is definitely the most heavy-handed. Is it racist to only date a particular race, whether your own or another? Is it racist or not?
I think we touched on that a little bit, but yeah.
We did. But now we need to get to the ultimatum.
Okay. I'm going to say no, but I think you should ask yourself certain questions first.
Like set the intention.
Yeah, like what is your intent? Because for a Black person to date within their own is completely different than from a white person to date within.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So much like history and precedent set, dictating these ideas. But I feel like for a Black person to date, or a non-white person to date inside their race, is, especially if you're in a colonized space or if you're in the United States of America, it's self-preservation. Whereas a white person wanting to date only another white person is mostly white supremacy.
Absolutely.
That's
like,
my take. That's like
I'm in the camp that only white people can be racist.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a lot of discussion, and maybe I'd like to think that I'm at a better place than most. I'd like to think that that's the superior argument, and maybe people just haven't gotten there yet. So yeah, I agree with you. If white people are only dating within their race and rejecting other races, that's racist. But it's impossible for Black, brown people and other racial minorities in general to be racist. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
But maybe Layla's question can speak more to like prejudices, discrimination, biases, etc.
Yeah, I think that's the deeper level to it, because on one level you have, white people and non-white people, but then within the non-white people community, it's like there's preferences about features and skin tones.
Mm-hmm.
That also you have to like dive deep within yourself to discuss those things as well. But at the end of the day, if I had to say an umbrella term, it would depend on like who I was speaking with. But in this group, I would say no, it's not racist to date within your own race, because we are having a very frank discussion about like why people choose to do that. But if I was not in this group and I was like in a group of strangers, I would say yes, it is, because like most people are not operating the way we are, as far as like how much we were having a frank discussion about our experiences, and we have context to talk about our racial preferences, but
we get to discuss the nuance.
Yeah, but if I'm at a dinner party and we just met and you're like, well, I only date white women, and it's like, I would give you a sideways look. If you were Black, I would give you an extra sideways look.
Yeah.
So I think like, yeah, I think for the sake of this discussion, no. But
yeah, I think I've decided that it depends, and I'm not sure if that's a cop out or not, but it definitely can be.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. It can be racist to date. Yeah, it can be.
I still don't. It can be either outwardly racist or internally racist to do it.
We exist in a prejudiced world. So like it's if you're not creating other behavioral changing mechanisms, throwing that out there into the Wild West when people exist with a biased mindset because we exist in a white patriarchal society does nothing, because they still come to it with that framework and that lens of thinking. So I think there have to be other kind of injunctive, normative clauses and activations that help people change their own behaviors first. You know, you can just create a system where, and I think there are apps like this now where it's like, you know, for you to even sign on, it's like an affinity group dating, you know. So if there's a solo app itself where only Black people can log in because they've self-identified as Black, or only Latino, Latinx folks can sign in because they've self-identified as such, then, you know, that's what I'm talking about, like the self-separation, the self-segregation versus forced integration, where then you're making me declare this thing publicly and express my bias, and it just creates a really murky, disturbing space for everyone.
So I'm going to say I definitely understand for the minority groups in America having that safe space of only dating someone from your particular group, the circumstances around that. But when I'm looking at it at a broader level, I always think at the end of the day, and I know this is like ignoring the influences of society, but you have to be following your truth and, you know, what's true about everyone as a person, not like the outward appearance. I do think it is racist, no matter who it is. If you're only going to date within your race or a particular race, I definitely understand why that would happen. And if people are able to self-evaluate and understand why they're doing that, that's good. But for me personally, I do think when you block off certain groups, it is racist.
Yeah.
You missed the Myriam and I had a discussion about what racism means.
Okay.
And we were for the sake of the argument, we are answering the question in like the broader term of racism being prejudice, discriminatory, bias, etc. But we were like, yeah, only whites can be racist, period, point blank. So.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it because it's like, wait, you said that you did think it was racist to date, right, Layla?
Yeah, because I think even if you're not white, you can be racist towards certain groups. A brown person could be racist towards Blacks.
Yeah, but I think that when a brown person is quote unquote, I wouldn't describe it as racist. I would say they're being like prejudiced, because racism implies like a power structure. So like anytime we act out our prejudices against each other, it's because we adhere to white supremacy, and white supremacy dictates that we are racist or prejudiced towards each other because of, you know, we're pitted against each other all the time. Before you left the conversation for a little bit, I did say, yeah, it is racist, but I said, but it depends on the company that I'm with, because I, you know, if like, you know, like we've been discussing, it's different when we date within our own race as opposed to, you know, white people dating within their own race. But at the end of the day, I think if you really think about if you're trying to find your own truth, and we all, you know, if we take race outside of it and we are all people, like, and in this society we live in, it's hard to connect, make contact with people. To just block yourself off from a whole race is it's a detriment to yourself, because you know, I've dated men who didn't have any kind of who didn't really have like racist awareness, and it was kind of breath of fresh air for a little bit to just be like, okay, this person might see me as a person, but then after a while it just, you just realize they're just in a little bubble and they're kind of clueless, and that's completely unattractive because they have no awareness of anything bigger than themselves. But then I have dated Black men who you know, just because you can't just date somebody just because they're the same color as you. That's not like any real, that's not based on anything, because it's all made up anyways, you know. So I think at the end of the day, if you really think about it, you wouldn't really limit yourself to one group of people.
And I like the distinction you made between racism and prejudice in the groups. That's good.
But I think that we can't really, I wouldn't say that's kind of why I won't say it is racist all the way to do it, but because we know the biases that everybody holds, you know.
I want to end on this question. How can people change what they've been conditioned to believe or prefer? What are some ways that you think people can change or challenge themselves or grow?
I think exposure, like, I think being more open-minded and like putting yourself in like not comfortable. I think because my personal background is because I've had a variety of experiences. Like, I've traveled outside of the United States. I grew up in a country that was mostly Black. I was raised in a country that's mostly white. I live in LA now, and I've dated, a variety of people. I think being exposed to different kinds of people makes you realize that we're not that different from each other, you know. So I think just exposure, like education too, just like reading, watching things that are not based on your, experiences, and just like making yourself feel uncomfortable in situations helps a lot with that.
Definitely. I agree with that. The travel aspect, when you have the chance to like experiencing other cultures, not limiting yourself in terms of your friend group or who you hang out with. If you expose yourself to more people, that always opens your mind. And there's only so much you can read about, but when you actually go in person and put yourself in those situations, then you truly understand how we're all connected together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this question of like, I talk about this often, it seems, of what it means to kind of resist your own complicit nature and how you can be a disruptor within yourself. That's tough work. That's like liberation work. I think it comes in different ways for everybody. It may come through meditation. It may come through, and meditation comes in different forms. You may be like an embodied meditator versus a still meditator, all these different things. But I think it ultimately is like, one, making a choice to open yourself to alternative lived experiences and understanding what those may be in comparison to, contrast, and commonality to your own. I think that's like the basic foundation. It's like, open yourself to understand that these types of existences are out there, and go meet someone of that lived experience and really be open and curious and appreciative of what you're hearing. So it takes like an unlearning of an unlearning of the skin we walk in every day. You have to first be willing to like shed just one layer of it, and then allow yourself to shed another and another. But that would be my biggest. It's just like, open yourself up to meeting someone new and really going into it with an appreciative mindset. It's not, like, I teach this all the time, called appreciative inquiry. And that's the first step, is understanding that your lived experience is not the only, it's not the best. And you have to shed that thinking first and foremost, and just be curious in a space.
I agree with those points, obviously. I would just add that I would say that I have friends from different backgrounds and races, and sometimes I know in short, people can do that. They can physically be present in spaces, but sometimes it's not enough. Like, they need to do the reading. They need to do the work. Because sometimes I know more things than my friends. And it's always a little weird because I'm just like, because I know it, for some reason I have this like assumption that everyone else is on the same page. And like they know it too. But yeah, and I think it's, as a white person, you know, especially now, I'm constantly seeing advice, and I've saved so many. As much as I like to think, oh, I'm good, I know that already, I am not. So rehearing it, being okay with accepting it, not coming from a place of fear or anger or embarrassment or shame. None of those. No one has time for that. Like, no one has time for this bad energy. Coming from a place of love and thoughtfulness can go a long way. And so I think if people can humble themselves, me, and do the reading. And so I really appreciate all the links and articles that you sent to us. I tried to get through as many as I could. And the YouTube videos were great too. So I'll be sharing those with my friends for sure. So yeah, not only exposing yourself as you both said, but also like not putting the labor and work onto those people, but doing it yourself. And then after you've done that, there's nothing wrong with like asking your friends, your Black and brown friends, if you can talk about it, and like giving them the power to decide, because sometimes they're not in a great place, and especially now. So that's what I would say to people. And then that's internal work that can be done. But I think externally, in terms of like organizations, a lot more needs to happen. So as much as all of us on an individual level can do something, I think people in positions of power and authority in organizational structures need to do something too. So like, I've called out my boss's boss's boss, and at the government, the power structure is very vertical. It's very defined, very vertical. And so she sent, just last week, she sent out, read these very short articles about Black people in offices, or how Black staff may be feeling. They were very easy to digest. They were great. And so I emailed her and I was like, thanks for sending these. These are really great. And we would all do well in our office to like take care of each other, support each other, and all of us can do the work on an individual basis. But like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing to change what happens in the office beyond how individuals will interact? Are you changing policy? Like, do Black staff have recourse for microaggressions? Are you giving them time off? Are they reaching out to you? If they're not, is that a problem? Do they feel comfortable reaching out to you? And I've done that to her and also the head of the agency. And I always get a very lukewarm response. It's always like, oh, that's not I don't have the ability to do anything.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, definitely the people who are in positions of authority or have certain powers to make the changes, they need to be willing to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want people to think that the entire burden is on them. It's okay to blame, media and your workplace and, I don't know, cereal companies.
I feel like
at the end of the day, everyone has to work together.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Myriam, you were saying something?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of like reading that needs to be done, because I feel there's just so much people are just like ignorant about, for sure, that I don't know, like, I think like the education system has failed people. And so I don't know. Like, I feel like we don't need to do our homework or something. Like, go back and start from square one, learning about history. I mean, learning about things outside of the United States kind of helps, I think, a lot too. My own biases, I've tried to like find like, world news, because we're so wrapped up in our own society, and trying to see how what's going on outside of the United States to kind of like give you some perception about what's going on within. So I just feel like also like we need to listen more to each other. I don't know if that makes sense, but like really listen to other people instead of like hearing to respond is also something we need to, as a whole in society, just do like active listening, go back to those critical skills of like
The fundamentals.
yeah. But I don't know, I feel like I don't have a lot of hope right
The
now.
more I learn, the more I realize I know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still so ignorant, and it can be the feeling can be overwhelming, but you just take it a day at a time and in stride, and it'll make you a better person. And you can approach yourself and others with grace. And I'm going to plug a couple things for, there's this comedian I recently came across from my friend. Her name's Naomi Ekperigin. I recommend following her. She's in a interracial relationship. Her husband's white, and they have a podcast called Couples Therapy Podcast, and they are so funny. They are, oh my God.
Yeah,
I've heard her before, do some stand-up or something.
She leaves me gagging for breath every time. Some people she's like kind of corny, but I think it's cute and lovely, so it's not for everyone, but yeah. So people can start there if they want. Couples Therapy Podcast. I know a lot of people are reading White Fragility. I haven't read it. A few years ago, I read a book called Black Rage. It was written in the 60s, I think post MLK assassination, so maybe like 1969. But it was written by these two Black male psychologists or psychiatrists, and I couldn't it was unclear to me who the book was written for, if it was like therapeutic for Black folks at the time, or if it was for white folks who just didn't know. But it was certainly captivating, and it was very interesting to see how nothing has changed. For me, anyway. I was like, oh, this was written 40 years ago. It definitely is a little bit outdated in terms of like how men view women and roles and things like that. Like for them, that was very normal, and they didn't question that part of things. But when it came to race, they addressed all the topics. So I recommend that book to people, Black Rage. I forget the author's names, but
yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for putting in those recommendations.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we're at a good spot to wrap up. Myriam, Chris, and Danicia, thank you so much for joining in on this discussion. A heavy one that needs to happen in these times of social upheaval, one that most are uncomfortable with having so openly. I appreciate each one of you. Hopefully today's episode has set off some introspection in the listener's mind and challenged them to examine their own beliefs and biases when dating and choosing romantic partners. Until next time, take care. Well, what did you think? If you want to hear more, subscribe to the Unheard Voices podcast.